Hi, my name is Jim O'Connor. I'm a field sales engineer for American Innovations, and today we're going to look at data capture fundamentals specifically for atmospheric corrosion inspections. So a quick look at the agenda will be some of the regulations of what's driving atmospheric corrosion inspections and what's covered by atmospheric corrosion in the regulations. A little bit about the workflow of atmospheric corrosion inspections. A lot of this is the prep side before you perform your survey, and some of the logistics actually behind the data collection side. Data validation gets into some of the documentation, and this is essentially the standard or the bar at which companies are now expecting and auditors are now expecting the data to be. So traceable, verifiable, and complete. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard that by now. That is essentially the level at which we're looking for data to come back in. The reporting side of things, using reports, making sense of the data that you've collected in a way of presenting it either to your boss or to an auditor, and essentially being prepared to answer the questions that they're going to ask. And there's lots of uses for different reports that you can take advantage of. And lastly, it's helping your management team make business decisions. They're looking to protect the assets that are there, and unfortunately, money spent on one project is money that can't be spent on another. And it's always easy to justify the need for your project as far as what impact that might have on the bigger system. And atmospheric corrosion inspections absolutely fall into that. So we'll take a look at some of the regulations, whether it's 192 for gas pipelines or 195 for liquid pipelines. These regulations are pretty specific, and in one paragraph kind of tell us what we need to know. They're telling us how often we need to do inspections, what we need to actually inspect, and what to do if we find inspections, or defects is I guess what they call it. So really nothing groundbreaking. It really lines it out pretty simply. So frequency, we're looking at once every 3 calendar years, but with intervals not exceeding 39 months. If it's offshore, it's once a year, not exceeding 15 months. And then they call out during inspections 7 key areas to pay particular attention to. And that's soil to air interfaces, under thermal insulation. At that point, insulation is kind of blocking what section of pipe we really want to inspect. It's hiding nicely behind an insulated blanket. Under desponded coatings, especially if the coating's in bad condition, it's not doing its job. At pipe supports, these also are there to serve a purpose. But if they're not installed correctly, a lot of times you'll have rubbing issues or areas where they may be causing a little bit of harm to the pipe. In splash zones, also deck penetrations and spans over water. And then here, lastly, they're just saying if you do find atmospheric corrosion, they call out 195, 581, or 479 as far as mitigation efforts go. And what you should do. So each operator must clean and coat each section of pipeline. Coating material must be suitable. And then except for portions of the pipeline where it may only be a light surface oxide or may not affect the safe operation of the pipeline before the next inspection, the majority of the pipeline will not be these 2 exceptions, or you go to extreme lengths a lot of times to prove that it is just one of these 2. So for the most part, you're looking at pretty much all those 7 key areas that we talked about. So I like pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, but the reason I like them is that just by looking at pictures, you see a lot more, and it starts opening up a little bit of the mindset you want to have for atmospheric corrosion inspections, and that is using a little bit of intuition and picking up on some of the context clues for an inspection. So the picture up here at the very top, you can see that it's a very dry, arid environment. The pipeline's running across a pretty open span. Compare that to the picture down here at the bottom where the pipeline submerged in sandy soil, does not look like it has coating, or if it did, it's completely washed out, and is already exhibiting some of the corrosion. And this is just a point in time, so we have no idea how old this pipeline is, what the material or grade of the steel is in the pipeline, what the operating conditions are, product inside. So without even knowing that, you can gather a lot of information just by taking pictures. And in today's day and age, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, pictures are so easy to take and come by, and there's so many tools that you can use to capture pictures and bring that in with your survey. Absolutely, take as many pictures as you can. River crossings are another place to pay particular attention. Rivers are kind of unique in the sense that they change course over the years. So when a pipeline was originally installed, that river may have changed course and may not be as covered as it was originally. Areas that were very dry or droughted can see severe flooding, and with that comes a lot of erosion. So pipeline that would normally be covered is now exposed. Erosion is not always just soil. With that, a lot of times come rocks or branches or trees. And these are physically hitting the pipeline at this point. So it's not just pipeline sitting on these things, but as the current flows, these things are actually hitting the pipeline and causing a lot of damage, in putting a lot of stress on the pipeline that it certainly was not designed for. Bridges inherently, I guess, are actually very difficult to inspect. If you just kind of stop and think about some of the logistics of performing an inspection on a pipeline near a bridge, more than often you're going to have traffic running right alongside that pipeline. In this one, we can't tell if it's a car bridge or a pedestrian bridge, but more than likely you're going to have to work with city or local governments to get permits to do this, schedule it far in advance, find a good time of year, and also it's going to be physically hard to reach and inspect these pipelines. And then lastly, plants and refineries. If you just kind of look up, you see what I call kind of the spaghetti noodle of piping. But my gosh, talk about some of the challenges of inspecting that and the amount of time that it would take to perform this. I can even say that about the picture on the right, where you have one little rocked-in gravel pad where it looks like maybe a launcher and receiver, but in the background you can see there's a storage tank and maybe a pressure vessel back there. So each one of these, just looking at this, you have piping, insulated piping, all the flanges, all the pipe supports, nuts, bolts, tanks. In one location, this could be a day or a couple days worth of work just to get the survey readings that you need. And then the refineries are a whole nother animal. So, and then lastly, third-party damage. This is essentially kind of Murphy's Law poking its head out, but third-party damage is very common, and especially with encroachments in the amount of construction activity we see in some of the rural areas. Someone not calling in an 811 ticket before they start digging, strike the pipeline, that's absolutely an immediate response, something that is going to take precedence over any other work you have going on. So there's not only strikes on the pipeline, but even outside forces like hurricanes or tornadoes. Things like this are actually going to trigger even more frequent inspections, either internally or auditors coming in and asking what you're doing to accommodate either changes in the area or weather patterns. So some of the workflow for performing atmospheric corrosion inspections is what I kind of simplify as the pre, present, and post handling of data and getting your ducks in a row and kind of knowing what's coming. So before you even get into it, you can have data stored in a lot of different formats. Whether it's paper form, or stored in a Excel spreadsheet, or in a database, you have to account for some of the logistics of actually accessing that data, and if you even have permission to it. So it may be specific to one particular site, where you can't necessarily pull that data ahead of time, or if you are, you're going to have to contact the ops admin to request that data and have a chance to review it beforehand. So data is not always as readily available as some people like to think. But again, just being prepared for what's coming up, and understanding a little bit of the logistics of accessing the site. If it's landowner issues, that's also actually quite common. There's certain times that you're not allowed to get in there, or just difficult landowners to work with. It happens, and it's something that you have to kind of plan for or plan around, I guess. But some of the predefined criteria is absolutely something that's needed for atmospheric corrosion inspections. So you can either grade a site as a whole, or divide it into smaller units. So that launcher receiver site that we were looking at, you can essentially treat everything the same, and compare all launcher receiver sites. But really, the more granular you can get with your surveys, the better. So a large site, such as a compressor station, you may have one grade for the facility overall, or you can break it down into a scrubber area or a compressor, header piping, or manifold piping. And each one of those areas is now being graded according to the worst conditions that were exhibited. So it's kind of the weakest link approach, or the point at which the MAOP is being limited, or could be compromised, I guess, if it's not mitigated. So here, this has kind of been predefined by one particular company, and this is just an example, but company name and inspection date and time, that's kind of a given. But the inspection report, the grading legend, is very important, and here we have good, fair, poor, and critical, but they also have definitions next to what defines what each one of those terms is. And this is important because now you have consistency and uniform readings being taken across the board. So it's more of an apples to apples comparison, in understanding what they actually mean when they say good, because I may have a different interpretation of good next to the other person. So there's absolutely a need for predefined criteria. If you're not using predefined criteria, or feel like it needs to be a little bit better, this is absolutely something to look for, to make sure your readings are what they should be. Some of the types of coating damage, same thing. This will be essentially called out. Here they have a scale, it looks like from 1 to 6, but just calling out different types of coating. And then there's blanks here for filling in other measurements, which are great too. Numbers are absolutely great as far as measurements go. Numbers are what they are; they don't lie. So this is a great time to fill that in. And then some even open field remarks, as far as whether you're reviewing the survey, or it's your boss or someone else new, they can at least kind of pick up where maybe someone else had dropped off. So planning your survey is really handled in 3 phases, and that is creating a report, and this is essentially understanding what's due for inspection, prioritizing what those are, and doing a little bit of review even before you go out to the site of what was the site beforehand, what can I expect now? Was there something that was in fair or poor condition that I really need to pay a little bit of closer attention to maybe than other areas? So the scheduling report, you're going to take a look at whether all the facilities you have are listed. So this is looking at the dates of what's meeting the scheduled report, what's coming up, I guess, within that calendar year or 3 calendar years, not to exceed 39 months. And what am I inspecting? Now all of a sudden you're getting into those logistics. Is there a landowner that I need to kind of be aware of, and maybe I need to touch base with my land agent? Where are some of these, and how do I actually inspect it? Is there a bridge inspection coming up that I need to be aware of, or some areas that are actually kind of hard to access? And other places where maybe there's multiple inspections. So you'll spend all day out here going through all the different flanges, pipe supports, insulation. There's a tank back there. So do you actually have all the tools that you're going to need to perform your surveys as well? Whether it's a pitting gauge or a UT to go out there and take all your readings, these are all tools, I guess, that you're going to need to be able to do your survey. So what's the best route to take, or are there overlapping right-of-ways? Are there other pipelines in the vicinity that I need to kind of work with any other operators? And then using RFID tags and photographs, these are simple ways of kind of verifying locations and being able to compare one location from its last inspection to current. Looking at what the work order history was. This is very important. You'll see where there have been repairs performed in the past, or any kind of mitigation efforts, whether it was a repaint, or it needed to be sandblasted, or there was a tie-in here, and there was an interconnect, and we have a new customer. All of a sudden, there's a new location that needs to be inspected. So all of these, I guess, kind of fit into just the prep side of understanding what your inspection is going to look like. So during your survey, there's some key information that you're going to want to collect. What's something to note here is this may be a pipeline that you've always inspected year in, year out, or this could be actually a new pipeline. There are so many mergers and acquisitions going on that an AFE number or key personnel, a project manager or inspector, that may not really mean a whole lot. People are now starting to retire, and names don't really mean as much as line numbers, what the station is, and longitude and latitude. This information is actually very static, and really kind of solidifies a little bit of the location information that you want to collect while you're out there. So during your survey, what am I actually looking for? So just looking at this picture again, and this just helps kind of visualize a little bit of, you may or may not have a chance to see this before getting out there, but those 7 key areas, soil to air interface for piping, we have insulated piping here. So all of a sudden, there's a huge span of insulated pipe that we're going to have to deal with. Lots of pipe supports, lots of different flanges, valves, pumps, I'm sure somewhere in the background. So just kind of being prepared for what am I looking for. You can go back to some of those 7 key areas that you have, or anything even just within routine maintenance. Some of the coating types that you'll need to look for. So there's a long list. This is actually a shortened version, but there's a long list of coating types of what you need to actually look for. Coating is actually not uniform throughout the pipe. So a lot of times you can look at the work history and understand a little bit of where coating may be different. And do you actually know how to identify epoxy coating versus latex coating, and so forth? So where you might have changes in the pipeline, a lot of times Smart Tool runs or ILI runs will actually pick these up as far as the data gathering for those. So it's one other place that you can look to kind of anticipate what types of coatings would be there from day one, and what additions or changes have been made over the years. So transition points in the pipeline, understanding that it could be a different coating type than what you see in the main joint of pipe. So this is anywhere that there's been a tie-in or some sort of change in the pipeline, and just understanding that you may have different types of coating, and some of those specific to that vintage of when the work was performed or when that pipe went through the pipe mill. and what you can kind of expect along the way. So some of the coding conditions of what you need to look for, all sorts of different ways of describing it. But again, we have definitions of what that would be. So disbondment, I know, gets called out a lot. In here, we're really just looking for loss of coating adhesion. Any coating that's applied in the mill is almost always going to be applied better than what you can do in the field, just because of the controlled conditions of a pipe mill. And being able to apply it in the right conditions, have the pipe in the right condition, so forth and so on. But again, being able to understand wrinkling or blistering within the coating and being able to actually document that in your survey. So we looked at this a little bit earlier, but just having the coating rating of understanding what's good, fair, poor, critical. Here we know coating damage is minimal. Okay, I mean, that's still a little subjective, but what about 3% to 5%? Does that make sense to everyone? In this case, I'm almost certain they're talking about surface area, but that's something that you would want to call out or be a little bit more specific where you can to say, you know, this measurement for any kind of metal loss or corrosion, you can actually go out there with the pitting gauge or a ruler and actually measure these out and show what it is in comparison so that these percentages actually mean a little bit more. So this picture kind of cracks me up because I've seen this in so many of the stations I've gone into. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. If an auditor comes in and they want to see records, you can absolutely bring this into an audit and pass the audit just fine. But what I think a lot of people forget is if you're looking for one particular file or one particular photograph in there, good luck. It is absolutely awful to be this disorganized in a day and age where digital format is your friend. And there's so many tools out there now, whether it's a database or whether it's electronic pictures, where there's really no reason to be limited to the amount of data that we're collecting. So all of this and maintaining it is so much more difficult than some of the tools that are pretty accessible. So after your survey, you've gone and conducted all the survey locations on your list. You're certainly going to sit down with your boss and start a mitigation plan. And some of those are going to be the most severe, and those are going to require mitigation efforts within a certain time frame. So based on the severity, we're going to want to see, is it active corrosion, or essentially, is it something that is new, or we can compare to what the corrosion looked like the previous survey as well? And what did some of those other pictures look like? And what were some of the repairs that were either done in the past or that may be needed? So this is where your boss is absolutely going to want to know, you know, yes, I know we have a problem, but how big of a problem is it, and how quick do we need to jump on it? In creating a summary report. So here, we're starting to use reports a little bit to help explain a little bit of the work orders that are coming. So right now, anything that was class 4, we're absolutely going to include pictures. What this also does is it opens up that report to not only in-house and people that were not there for the survey, or people that are familiar with that location, but a lot of people hire mitigation work out to crews, and the more pictures they have going into it, the more that they're going to be able to plan for the mitigation effort that it's going to take. So you'll keep a summary report going with dates, and then also any kind of action items. You're going to keep these open essentially until the mitigation is complete. So whether that's a pipe repair or a recoat, whatever it is, you're essentially keeping interim reports in the meantime. So whether you're asked on a weekly basis from your boss, hey, where are we at with some of these, or you see bad weather coming in, some of these projects are going to push a little bit. At least you're able to kind of keep track of where these projects lie and what your deadlines are to get it complete. But by the end of the year, you really should be at the point of closing out your surveys doing a year-end summary report with no actionable items. So here in the post-mitigation, we now have closed out the project. So with this are all the dates. And this all ties into the regulations and what the requirements are. But there's a date that we discovered the corrosion, date that mitigation was initiated or any kind of repair, and the date that that repair was actually completed. So just beginning a recoat does not mean that it's finished. So we're actually talking about closing up. Crews have demobbed and project's absolutely complete. So where you actually find reports, we talked a little bit about the validation and verification. Validation is having the predefined terms by a lot of times subject matter experts within the company, but it's having terms that are consistent and uniform so that all technicians are using the same terminologies across the board. The verification, getting into traceable, verifiable, and complete. All the data you needed to collect was. The locations that are surveyed, understanding a little bit of not just pulling locations from a spreadsheet, but also mapping those locations or understanding a little bit of the routes that would need to be taken to perform those surveys. Audits. A lot of times you can create audits in-house where maybe you want to share all the information that was collected. But when an auditor comes in, you may not want to share, too much information where maybe they just need, what was the survey like this past location. You may not want to pull in the past 10 readings. It just may be more than what they're really asking for. So you'll want to set up reports specifically for audits where you're kind of controlling a little bit of the flow of information. It not only helps kind of handle the data that's being shared, but even the speed of the audit. You don't want to spend a lot of time digging for information. So having reports set up a lot of times is going to save you in that search effort. The O&M effectiveness, companies a lot of times are looking at corrosion inhibitors and other things to combat corrosion along the pipeline. They're actually monitoring this regularly and yearly and spending a lot of money to try to prevent corrosion. So they'll look at performance of their system just to help them plan for next year's budget and understand what's working and what's maybe not. And some of the conditions around that to kind of help them understand a little bit more. And then, of course, as a budgetary aid, we kind of talked about this as far as setting up a report with pictures and a good case as to why your project should receive funding over the next. And at the end of the day, you do want it to be a fair comparison. So, I mean, you want the projects that actually need the money to be receiving them. But at the end of the day, you need to present it in the best way possible. So that's really it. That's just some of the fundamentals talking about data capture and being prepared and planning for the inspections, what to do when you get out there, and what to do with the data once you've collected it. So my information's right here. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to sit down and talk with you and reach out to me, and would love to talk with you more. Thank you.